Hi, everyone. My name is Emily Bernstein, and I'm the Education Outreach Associate at the Holocaust Center of Pittsburgh. The Holocaust Center of Pittsburgh connects the horrors of the Holocaust and anti-Semitism with the injustices of today. Through education, the Holocaust Center seeks to address these injustices and empower individuals to build a more civil and humane society. Our offerings include exhibits in our public gallery, both in person and online, an extensive library and archive, engaging cultural events, internationally renowned speakers, and free and affordable resources for teachers. We also offer a robust collection of virtual opportunities and resources, and for more information, we invite you to visit our website at hcofpgh.org. We're here today with Nick Haberman, who was once our Holocaust Educator of the Year and continues to astound us with all the educating and innovation he has made progress with. So a little bit about the Holocaust Educator of the Year. The Holocaust Center of Pittsburgh has awarded the Holocaust Educator of the Year award for 4 years running, and it was created to promote and recognize the importance of Holocaust education. This award is given every year to a Holocaust educator who inspires critical thought and personal growth through the lessons of the Holocaust. And the winner of the Holocaust Educator of the Year award receives $2,000 unrestricted to further Holocaust education in their classes. And the school in which the recipient is employed also receives $1,000 to support the teaching of the Holocaust. For more information about the Holocaust Educator of the Year, please visit our website because we will be up and running in the coming school year. So thank you, Nick, for being with us today. It's a pleasure to have you and to work with you. And I want to let everybody know a little bit about you. So Nick Haberman is a fourth-generation teacher from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. In 2018, he was named the Holocaust Center of Pittsburgh's Holocaust Educator of the Year, the Pennsylvania Council for the Social Studies Secondary Teacher of the Year, Incline Magazine's Who's Next in Education, Master Teacher of the Holocaust by the Jewish Foundation for the Righteous, and he is a 2019-2020 United States Holocaust Memorial Museum Teacher Fellow. In addition to creating and managing the Light Education Initiative, Nick teaches the Holocaust, background, tragedy, and aftermath, and multiculturalism, genocide, and human rights violations at Shaler Area High School. Nick, we are so pleased to have you with us today, and we're excited to learn more about you and your approach to Holocaust education. So welcome.
Thank you for having me.
So could you please, I know I've given you this introduction, but I would love to hear a little bit more about you, your background, both personal and educational, that led you into the field of teaching and where you are today.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. Thanks for the opportunity to share this story. It starts in Etna, in just outside of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I went to Shaler Area School District for all of my years of schooling. My mom was a teacher, and so were all of my aunts and uncles, and my grandma was still actively teaching when I was growing up. She had the best job in the world, which was elementary school phys ed teacher. And she is an absolute legend in the community because of that. And then her sisters were teachers and her mom, and it just goes from there. So growing up, my mom was always living the teacher lifestyle, and my dad and a lot of his family members worked in various occupations. And my dad found this balance between the first half of his career, he was a social worker, and the second half of his career, he worked in the trades. So for a period of time in my formative years, I had a dad who was a social worker and a mom who was a teacher. So I think that's probably why I am the way that I am today. So I graduated from Shaler in 2001, and I went to the University of Pittsburgh, and I was going to major in history. And I tossed around a lot of ideas, and my mom kept telling me over and over and over, she said, "You're a teacher, you're going to be a teacher." And as an 18-year-old, I kept saying, "No, I'm not. I'm going to do all these other things, and I'm going to do this and that." And she said, "You're a teacher. That's just your personality." And so whenever I started going to Pitt, I got involved very quickly, because my mom was right, as moms always are, with education. And I ended up at the Carnegie Museum of Natural History in their education department, working with the natural science day camps. And you can see behind me, my wife is a science teacher. So it's just a part of our family and a part of our life. And I fell in love with natural science teaching. And I thought that I wanted to be an elementary school teacher like my mom, But 10 minutes after that, I realized that I was not an elementary school teacher. I was going to be something else. So I ended up moving from the Carnegie Museum of Natural History while I was in college to a study abroad opportunity in London, England, where I worked at the British Museum and the Natural History Museum archives. And I got into archives work and documents, and I was talking with people about library science programs and all sorts of different things. But while I was working with an archivist, I kept going back to, I wish I was talking to someone about this. I wish I was sharing these stories. I wish I was telling someone about all this stuff. I wish I was educating. I don't just want to live in the documents. I want to live in the stories and share them with people. And so when I got back from London, I applied for the Pitt Education Grad School. And that's the MAT program that I got into, which was a master's in arts and teaching. And I did that. And I did my internship at Franklin Regional High School in American history and world history. And then in 2006, I got a job unexpectedly replacing the teachers that taught me whenever I went to Shaler. There was a mass retirement from the baby boom generation, and I stepped into one of 6 open social studies teaching positions in 2006. And year one, it was American history, all different levels. And just to like take this, into the content today, in the first couple months, I realized I'd be teaching the Holocaust as a non-Jewish kid from Etna with no Jewish friends and no experience studying the Holocaust and nobody in my family having lived through it. And so I did what any smart young teacher would do is I asked my mom, and my mom told me to ask my aunt, who was a teacher. And my aunt said, call the Holocaust Center of Pittsburgh. She said, get a survivor, bring them into your classroom. It's the best way to teach the Holocaust. And at that time, it was quite easy to bring a survivor into classrooms. And so I called up the Holocaust Center, and the rest is really history, which I'm sure we'll unpack throughout this conversation.
Definitely. Wow. That's good advice. And moms do always know. They do.
Yeah,
Um,
I'm sure she's going to watch this and she's going to laugh, and because it's true, it's
and
happening.
inside she'll be saying, that's my kid.
Yes, yeah, she was right all along. And so I guess I'll transition into my first experience teaching the Holocaust, because I know that's what this is all about, is how long have I taught the Holocaust? How did I get into it?
Mhm.
And the first survivor that I was connected with was Jack Sitzheimer. And at the time, I didn't know him. I knew nothing about him. But the Holocaust Center said, here's his number. We spoke with him. He says, give him a call and he'll tell you what to do. So I called him up and he said, yeah, I'll come in to speak. And I said, okay, well, how many kids? I have, a bunch of classes. He said, whole school. I said, what do you mean? He said, I want it all of them. Give me all of the kids. I'll talk to all of them. As many as you can get. That's how many I'll talk to. So I talked to the other social studies teachers who were all new teachers at the time. And they said, yeah, sure, we'll do it. Let's do an assembly. And Jack said, just come pick me up at my house, bring me to your school, stick me in front of as many people as you want me to talk to, and I'll talk to them for as long as you want me to. And then when I'm done, you take me home. All right, no, not a problem. So I picked him up. I brought him to Shaler. He walked into the auditorium with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of students, and this was 9th graders at the time. And he told his story. And for those of you that don't know, look up the Jack Sitzheimer survivor testimony. He recorded it. It's incredible. And so at the end of the story, you could hear a pin drop. Teachers were crying. Students wanted to come up and get their picture with him. People wanted to hug him. People wanted to shake his hand. There was a line that started at the stage that went all the way to the back doors of the auditorium of students lining up to get a selfie so that they could share him on social media. And they just fell in love with him. And this is a non-Jewish school for the most part. And so he really made this unbelievable impact that I could have never made without him. And it was time to take him home, put him back in the car. And in hanging out with Holocaust survivors, you always have these moments where I realized this guy's like a precious, like, resource for the world. Like, and he didn't put his seatbelt on. And I remember I said, you got to put your seatbelt on, because I got to get you back safe. I didn't realize what precious cargo I was transporting today. Like, we got to be very careful with you. And we started to talk about things, and he started to talk about the importance of education and teachers. And And he was not a teacher, but he valued teachers more than most people I've met in my life. And then he dropped this bomb on me. He said, because we were talking about seatbelts, we were talking about all these other things. He said, you know, I'm going to die soon. And when I do, it's up to you to tell my story. And at the time, this was 15 years ago, I laughed it off and he laughed it off. And I said, nah, look at you, you're healthy. You're walking around. You look great. And he said, no, I'm going to be gone. And all the educators are going to be responsible for carrying on the stories of survivors. So you got to carry on my story. And then he said the words that changed my life for the last 15 years. He said, have you ever been to the Holocaust Center of Pittsburgh? And I said, no. And he said, I'm taking you there. Let's go. We walked in. It was in Squirrel Hill still at the time, in the old JCC office. And he gave me a copy of Flares of Memory. I still don't think he paid for it. I definitely didn't pay for it. He just took it and gave it to me, and he signed it, and he showed me his signature, and he held it up and said, someday I'm going to be gone, and you're going to have to show this to your students to prove that I was alive, and you're going to have to continue the legacy, pass it on, and then they can pass it on. And just less than 2 years later, he died. And I met other survivors, and it's the same story. And I started to realize that teachers have a great responsibility, obligation to embed Holocaust education in our school districts for the long haul. It can't just be one person giving their story to one other person. It needs to be part of the system. It needs to be sustainable. It needs to be a new approach, because we are very close to having no more survivors of the Holocaust able to speak to our students. So now is our moment to really change the game. It's been 40 years of successful Holocaust education through the Holocaust Center of Pittsburgh, but we need to look to the next 40 years. And that's what I'm trying to do constantly, is to take the work of the Holocaust Center and embed it in schools so that when I'm gone, it still continues.
And you certainly are. I want to give you a moment to, you know, we're going to talk a little bit about teaching and what you think makes great teaching. But alongside of that, I want to hear more about what it is you're doing to embed Holocaust education in your school district. So taking a step back, I guess, and looking at what do you think of when you think of great teaching and being a good teacher? Um, what kind of qualities do you try to espouse?
There's not, it's not, it's pretty straightforward, and it's really basic. Is every student is somebody's kid, so you need to make sure that you're being very delicate with all content. And somebody once told me, getting them safely into the content, getting them safely out of the content. You need to remember that everyone and anyone can learn. And if you think that it's their fault that they're not learning, it's not. It's your fault, or it's the environment that they are in, or it's the trauma that they're coming into the classroom with, or it's the fact that they didn't eat breakfast, lunch, or dinner for the last 3 days. It's never them. Anyone can learn anything. You just have to create a safe and environment for the students. So forgetting about Holocaust education and just focusing on education in general, the anyone can learn philosophy comes to me from Dr. Shinichi Suzuki, who was a pioneer of teaching very little kids how to play violin at a level that most people thought was far above their ability and their age. They thought, oh, these kids are prodigies. And Dr. Suzuki said, kids aren't prodigies. Anyone can learn this. It's just like learning a language. And it's the mother tongue method. If you speak the language around the kids enough, they're going to learn how to speak a language. If you expose them to the language of music enough, they're going to learn how to speak the language of music. And if you expose them to the language of remembrance and advocacy and activism enough, they're going to learn how to be activists and advocates, and they're going to learn how to carry on other people's stories and to practice remembrance as part of their daily life. So if you take this specifically into Holocaust education, it's all about um, remembering that it's a very sensitive topic, and if you just kind of go in with the Mr. Rogers type approach, that, and I'm going to quote him, that anything human is mentionable, and anything that is mentionable can be more manageable. When we talk about our feelings, they become less scary, um, and it helps us to know that we're not alone. And he also talked about how it's not easy for any of us, including ourselves, and or it's not easy for any of us to accept that all living things, including ourselves and those we love, will die. And it's hard to talk about it. And the people we trust with that important talk can help us to know that we are not alone. And teachers are often some of the first people that students trust with that important talk. And in a Holocaust class, every conversation has its root in death. And that's why we need to look to the people who have done this long before us and have done it very well. So look to Jack Sitzhomer, look to Fred Rogers, look to just anybody who's this pioneer in education or in remembrance. Look to my mom, look to my grandma. Uh, so that's I guess my advice to new teachers is just approach it like you're nurturing a pet or a child, and it's going to take time and effort and work and be a labor of love, and let them know you care about them, and everything else will figure itself out.
That's that's great advice. Haven't heard better advice than that, honestly. Um, and that's the perfect lens with which to look at our next question. Um, you know, given everything that you've learned in terms of teaching, in the social emotional sense, what literature or teaching methods do you draw inspiration from to craft your Holocaust and human rights curriculum? And can you tell us a little bit about your approach?
Yeah, I think I think number one is going into it knowing that I know nothing, and that I will never know everything is an important start to all of this. I was at a Waldman International Arts and Writing Competition award ceremony a few years ago, and someone from the Pittsburgh community came up to me, and they started talking to me about the Holocaust, and one of their family members was a survivor, and I said, yeah, I'll just never understand. I try to understand. And they said, don't try to understand. And I said, what? They said, don't try to understand that which cannot be understood. And they went into to talking about the Torah, and they said, if it's impossible for you to ever understand this, then you're wasting your time trying to understand this. Don't. Just accept that you will not know everything and take it from there. My my approach to teaching the Holocaust and or human rights or genocide is to take a look at what everybody's done well before me and just try to fit that to my specific teaching environment. So step one is look at who are you teaching, and for the most part I'm teaching students ages grades 9 through 12. And what's the community that I'm in? I'm in a community that's 99% white, that is of a working class background, a lot of kids and grandkids, really grandkids of steel workers, and now it's kids of healthcare workers and people whose parents are both working constantly. I primarily have non-Jewish students, so I start to look for resources that not only introduce the Holocaust, but introduce students to multiculturalism, because I don't have a lot of diversity in my school, that introduce students to Judaism, because a lot of students don't know much about the history of Judaism, including myself when I went to Shaler. And I try to connect what resources I'm finding to contemporary issues that we're facing in the Shaler area communities, issues of racism, issues stemming from systematic racism, and from a history of white privilege, and from a history of colonialism, and from a history um, of really whitewashing a lot of the resources that we've used for a long time. So it's this constant balance between how do we make you and help you celebrate your culture while opening your eyes to the fact that there's a lot of wrong that has happened in the world, and there's a lot of wrong that's still happening in the world. So constantly trying to find the balance. So when I'm looking for Holocaust resources or literature, I'm always trying to find something that connects the past to the present, something that connects the Holocaust to contemporary identity-based violence and discrimination, something that connects the Holocaust to contemporary anti-Semitism, to, of course, racism, to issues of LGBTQIA, to issues of xenophobia, to sexism, to gender inequality, to everything. So obviously you can look to Echoes and Reflections, you can look to Yad Vashem, you can look to USC Shoah, you can look to Choices by Brown University, everything the Holocaust Center of Pittsburgh brings to the table, which is like an entirely different discussion about the absolutely insane, incredible resource of Chutzpah, the Waldman competition, which has been around, I think longer than I've been alive, and the connections to the Butterfly Project out of San Francisco, the Daffodil Campaign out of Poland. I mean, trying to really give students almost a menu of these are all the things that exist. And based on what's happening in the world at this present moment, this is what we're going to pick and choose from. But I think the longer you teach the Holocaust, the more you get to a place where you're familiar and comfortable with the resources and you can let the students choose. And this is tough. This is not a first year thing. And if it is, it's a brave first year teacher to say, here, students, here are 20 things. Pick any one of them you want. You can all pick different things. And here's what you need to show me. You need to show me that you dove into the resource, the story, the testimony, the whatever, that you understood it, you got something out of it, and then prove it to me in any way you'd like, which could be art, it could be writing, it could be song and dance, it could be a letter, it could be something, and then get it outside of the classroom. So either share it physically by displaying it somewhere outside of the classroom, share it on social media, online through some campaign, write a letter, make a phone call, host an event. So always thinking, how do we combat what I call disposable education, which is the problem in education where a lot of us ask students to put their time and energy into things, and then almost as soon as they're done, we check a box and we throw those things away. And it's just the system that we have created for ourselves. So we need to innovate. We need to reinvent, reimagine, remake learning, as Greg Bear, I'm sure, would say. We need to think outside of the box. And how can we deliver this content to students in a way that they can take it, digest it, use it, and share it to make the community in the world better. And I know I got real big, real fast with this content. So just to get back into the basics, obviously it's important to give some foundational knowledge of the Holocaust: who, what, where, when, why. To do a macro versus micro approach, even if you only have one class period. So that, there are these gigantic documentaries. Here's where they are. Here's what's in them. And then let's look at a survivor testimony. And then you start to introduce the students to the fact that everyone's story is different and that this sort of stuff is still going on, and anti-Semitism didn't start or end with the Holocaust. And after that, then you can really dive into the arts and these creative outlets. And this is the last thing I'll say before I'll send it back to you, is we've created a beautiful approach to education through STEM or STEAM or STREAM, depending on what school you go to. So you got science, tech, engineering, math, and some schools add religion into it, which is the R, and some schools add art. And through STEM, which was, I think, the founding initiative, the goal was to teach students to be problem solvers, to be innovative, to think about finding solutions to problems in new and unique ways. And we've done that. And our students can take a phone and do anything, and take an iPad and do anything. And what we haven't done, which is how and why I created Light, is we haven't really given them problems to solve within their community based around identity-based violence and discrimination, based around anti-Semitism and racism, based around all these humanities-based, human-based problems. And what I try to do, and it's now become my mission, is try to encourage students and provide opportunities for students and teachers to apply the STEM skills to Holocaust, genocide, and human rights, education, remembrance, and advocacy. And I do that, and my approach that I'm trying always is inspiring, preparing, and empowering. How can we inspire our students? How can we prepare them? How can we empower them? And that's the Light Education Initiative, which is an acronym for Leadership through Innovation in Genocide and Human Rights Teaching. And the Light Education Initiative, lightinitiative.org, was all created because I won the Holocaust Educator of the Year award, and I had money and I felt an obligation, and Jack was in the back of my head, and all these other people were in my mind saying, there's a lot you can do with this money that's more than just a one-off program. And that's what Light is it's meant to be something that can be shared, that will help other teachers and school districts and students and community members really use Holocaust remembrance as the foundation to something that is transformative, that's dynamic, that's innovative and unique. But it's really simple because it's just about connecting existing resources like the Holocaust Center of Pittsburgh to schools permanently, not once a year, every day. Back to you.
No, it's amazing. I think that I guess the Jewish word for this is nachas, like joy. It's kind of like the joy a parent gets from a child doing all these wonderful things. So the Holocaust Center is just so incredibly proud of you, Nick, and very inspired by the work that you do. Like, we can't do what we do without you. And I'm curious to know, like, what kind of impact you see, not just in your students' lives, but in your life. How do you see this Holocaust education and human rights education in the way that you educate through Light? How do you see it impacting your students? And do you see a change in them after they experience your curriculum, or any changes? Do you see any changes in your school community?
Yeah. And I'm going to throw a Hebrew word back at you that I had to shamelessly Google because I don't speak Hebrew, but I think it's beshert.
Yeah, meant to be.
Yeah, meant to be. Everybody, it's happened so many times in the last 15 years that, I meet Jack and we have this moment together, and he takes me to the Holocaust Center, and, all these things just keep happening. And that's why people I meet keep saying it's, beshert. Um, Edgar Snyder, who's I'm happy to say is a friend of mine now. I absolutely adore him, and Adele, his wife. And Edgar was one of the people to point this out. He said, "Could you imagine if you called the Holocaust Center? You could have been speaking to 80 different people. Why Jack? Why did he say that to you that day?" He said, "That's beshert." So, and so through Light, really, what I've seen is I've seen students, and it was informally kind of happening before it was called Light. Um, so it's been happening really for, since Jack, um, and formally in the last few years. It's what it's done is it's shown me that, and it's reminded me that, number one, I was once a young person with a lot of potential, and now I'm an old person. I still would like to think with a lot of potential, but it's reminded me that we all have only a finite amount of energy, and there's an opportunity cost to everything we do. And so, what Light has shown me and reminded me is that whatever we ask our students to do, and whatever we ask them to put time and energy into, that means they're using the time and energy for that day, and that's all they've got, with me and at that moment. And also, if they're using it on something I'm going to throw away, they're not using it on something that's going to do good in the community. And um, a fellow Light coordinator who is at the Shaler area middle school, his name's Chris Lazowski. He's been a mentor of mine for a long time. And he's very environmentally minded, very environmentally conscious, all about sustainability. And he's had many conversations with me about environmental sustainability, taking care of the planet, the UN Sustainable Development Goals. It's all of this. And I try to take his words and others um, to heart and try to make sure that everything that I'm bringing into my classroom i- is getting out there in the world. And so what I've seen is, instead of students, for example, writing, doing a piece of writing, practicing writing based around genocide remembrance or something, could be anything, um, and throwing it away, what you can help the students do is you can help them craft a letter to their representatives. And in practice, what that means, that I've found out, is that the students are learning how to address an envelope, because a lot of them haven't done that in a long time or ever. They learn where to put the stamp on the envelope. Even before that, they learn how to find out who their representative is. So now, through Holocaust remembrance and genocide advocacy work, genocide prevention work, now you have students learning how to seek out who their representatives are. And then some of them find out that they don't like their representative. And now, through Holocaust remembrance, you're having conversations about democracy and representation in government. And you're encouraging students to take part in their government. And then that leads into discussions about local government and school boards and councils and boroughs and state reps and senators, and all through Holocaust remembrance. And then they have to write their letter. And through writing their letter, and this is just one example, you find out that they're not the best writers. And so you can work with their English teachers on their writing. And you find out that maybe they don't have all their content straight. And so now you're working on content and you're working on writing, and things are starting to blend together. So in one letter, you might see bits and pieces of their government class in with their ELA class, in with their social studies class, and maybe they want to really inspire their elected officials. So maybe they're including a photograph of a piece of artwork that they made, or a song that they recorded, and they're sharing that. So now what you start to see is all those breakdowns within a school of my space, your space, start to disappear, and they start to see, oh, this is just about being a decent human being. And so what light gets the students to do, and that I've seen them get really excited about, is they start to work on things they feel are meaningful and valuable. Not that they weren't before, but instead of turning their letter into me and having me grade it and throw it away, they stick it in the mailbox, and they feel like they've done something, and they have done something. Instead of just painting a picture to just exist for a moment, maybe they put some extra time and effort. They work with their art teachers. They work through the Holocaust Center. They do the Waldman competition, and they create something beautiful enough that gets hung on the wall of the school permanently. And then they help plan an event that's an open house with Holocaust remembrance at the heart of it, to bring community members and family members and friends in to see their artwork hanging on the wall. So I've not created the method of writing letters to representatives. I've not created the art project of the Waldman competition. I've not created anything new. The only thing that I've done is I've created an approach to have those things work together. And it was created out of necessity. Light was made because I saw students having legitimate complaints about their school and community and country. And I kept telling them they needed to do something about it. And I never gave them opportunities to do something about it in class. I said, you should write to your representative, and that was it. Or I said, you should, go out there and practice advocacy work. And I never thought, well, they don't know how. They've never done this before. They don't know how to safely do it. They don't know how, they're afraid. They don't, because they've never done it before. And so I need to teach them the skills and the content through the opportunities. So one example right now is it's Black History Month. So I challenged the students to think about Black History Month in the Multicultural Studies class in what can we do in 28 days that gets outside of the classroom. Step one is identify what you do or don't know about Black history and culture. Step two is brainstorm ways that we can address the problem of ignorance around Black history and culture in my school district and community. Step three was, well, let's plan a panel discussion to talk with African American alumni from our school district and community members. And step four is the students write the questions to ask, and they will be interviewing They'll be doing the panel discussion, and there's more steps in there, like helping the students record it, teaching the students how to do audio recording, video recording, editing. And then after the program, how do you share it with the school and the community? So you're really just taking what you would normally do in a classroom, but applying the project-based learning and STEM approach to humanities with the Holocaust at the foundation. My challenge is finding a way to explain this in as few words as possible and not in an hour-long interview. And thankfully, that's what my team is now doing. So I have someone working for Light part-time who is our creative director, and she's a former student. Her name's Nicole Smar. She came up with the logo and the website and is rebuilding the website thanks to a generous grant from the Lloyd Myers family and the Myers Family Foundation. And I have another former student, Roman Benti, working on community outreach and how to connect existing Allegheny County community library programming and other community-based program to schools through Light. And then a former mentor teacher of mine, Doug Corey, who's working on school outreach, because in order to help teachers and students create these new programs and approaches, you really need someone constantly keeping up with correspondence and nurturing this relationship. And then what I do is try to sort of oversee the whole thing and make all the pieces fit together and find grant funding through the Holocaust Center of Pittsburgh to incentivize Holocaust, genocide, and human rights education. And that's what it's all about, is in giving schools a reward for doing it better, not punishing them for doing it worse.
It's all very much, the word I kept thinking while you were speaking is holistic. Making that analogy to medicine in a way. It's a very holistic approach to education, and it's very impressive to see what your students are doing. And beneath the links beneath this video, we're going to put some links to all your recommendations, as well as the Light Center, so that students and teachers can learn more about how they can get involved.
My favorite part about Light right now is that I have some examples now for years of students making Holocaust memorials, putting on Holocaust remembrance events, doing an event to raise awareness and funds for, unfortunately, after the Tree of Life tragedy. Examples of students advocating for Indigenous Peoples Day and getting Indigenous Peoples Day recognized in the Millville community and put on the Shaler area calendar. Currently, I have a very conservative Republican politician and a very liberal Democratic politician working together on Genocide Awareness Month recognition. And I have these success stories. However, my favorite part about Light is not all that stuff. It's the fact that other schools who are doing Light are doing it better than me. And isn't that what we all want? Is if every student is somebody's child, every Light school feels like my child. And don't you want your kids to be better than you are whenever they grow up? So there are schools out there that send me emails saying, here's what we're doing for Light. And they say, is this enough? And I say, it's more than what I have been able to do. And I made it, and you're doing it better than me. And that tells me that it has potential, because you're taking it and running with it, and you're seeing the dream, living the brand. You've adopted the mission as your own. It doesn't cost your school any money. Nobody's profiting off of this. It's really just about doing the right thing because it's the right thing to do. And it makes everyone's jobs more enjoyable, and the students have more fun with it, and it's more meaningful. And the time passes in a way it just feels different than it used to whenever I talked at students all the time. Seeing them produce things that make a difference outside of the classroom, it's the most rewarding experience that I've had as a teacher. And I just want to help share that with other people, because as Jack told me, I'm not going to be around forever. And when I do, it's up to other people to hopefully learn from what I learn from take the stories of Jack that inspired me. And then these new teachers, year one, can just hit the ground running. They don't have to go through that 15 years of figuring it out to finally know how to do it. They can do it right and do it well on year one. And I'd say, and this is something that's important to say, I'd say doing it right and doing it well is acknowledging that STEM is extraordinary. Don't compete with it. Find a way to balance it. The kids are crushing it in STEM. Don't try to outdo that. Try to work with it, and just take all those STEM skills and roll them in to really the humanities. And then you've got the yin yang, you've got the Tao, you've got the balance, you have the up and the down, the black and the white, the left and the right. You have the opposite and the interdependent, which I feel has been lacking. And unfortunately, I can prove that it's been lacking because we've had the most violent act of anti-Semitism in American history in the last couple of years in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. We have political violence at a level that I've never seen in my lifetime. So clearly, as a culture, we've missed it. We need to revamp education. And this is one way that I've found that we can do it.
Yeah, let's get into that a little bit. You know, you did mention many ways in which you incorporate like modern events and movements into your education about the Holocaust and other human rights violations. But this year has been quite a year, and I want to follow up on that by, you know, recent events in our country have just been very heavy, including but not limited to, COVID-19, the nationwide riots against police brutality and systemic racism, violence precipitated by our current political divide. And I want to know, I'm assuming you do think there are lessons that can be taken from the Holocaust to grapple with these difficult topics, but I'm wondering how you achieve that through your light model, to empower students, to be
Yeah.
intentional.
Good question. A couple answers. Number one is don't try to do it on your own, is look to institutions that have been doing it right for a long time. And this is not a shameless plug for the Holocaust Center of Pittsburgh, but I would be a very bad Holocaust educator if it weren't for the Holocaust Center of Pittsburgh. So you look to your organizations that are in your cities or communities or towns or wherever you live, whether it's a university or a Holocaust center or a human rights this or a museum that, you look to these organizations that have been doing it right for a really long time, that are really nonpartisan organizations. The Holocaust Center of Pittsburgh you can bring it into any school in the country and it's going to be accepted with open arms because the mission is just one of Holocaust remembrance and Holocaust education and Holocaust, educational outreach. And the Holocaust Center, of course, has had law enforcement trainings and has trained teachers across the region and has connected with students and connects with the survivor community. So piece of advice number one is don't try to figure it out on your own. Ask the people who do this for a living and do it well. And the Holocaust Center of Pittsburgh is, of course, the closest place for me that does it right and does it well. And then you look to your other institutions, national institutions like the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum, which has guidelines for teaching the Holocaust and has lessons comparing the Holocaust and the Nuremberg laws in the Holocaust to Jim Crow. It has connects the Holocaust to contemporary mass atrocity and genocide and human rights violations through things like the Simon Skjodt Center for Genocide Prevention, I think it's called, and the Early Warning Project that they do. So you go to the Holocaust Museum's website, ushmm.org, and you're going to be looking at things on Rwanda and Cambodia and Bosnia and Myanmar and all these other places. So again, look to the institutions and how they do it and how they address these topics, because the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum is a federal institution. So you don't have to worry about stepping on any political toes in your classroom if you're turning to a Holocaust Center and a National Holocaust Museum or an organization like USC Show or Yad Vashem, or what I like to bring into my classroom, Together We Remember, an organization, togetherremember.org, that was founded by the grandson of 4 Holocaust survivors and has a mission to turn collective memory into collective action, turn remembrance into action. And they really have an incredible campaign around Genocide Awareness Month, which is in April. And the whole intent of that program is we can't prevent the Holocaust from happening. It already happened, but we can prevent anti-Semitism today. We can prevent acts of discrimination and violence against other victims of identity-based violence today. We can do something today with the Holocaust as the foundation of all of our action through these Genocide Awareness Month programs and campaigns. So your question is one that is challenging if we get, kind of back to the basics of like these political divides and issues of anti-Semitism and racism and the lessons of the Holocaust that we can, learn from today. I think it was Carl Jaspers, maybe. He said, "That which has happened is a warning. To forget it is guilt. It was possible for this to happen, and it remains possible for it to happen again at any minute." And so you have to let your students know that the Holocaust was not perpetrated by demons or beasts in a land far, far away. You don't want to dehumanize the perpetrators. The Holocaust was perpetrated by human beings, just like the ones that live in our world today, and in a civilized country, carried out primarily by highly educated people with the whole world watching. And so you can easily connect to conflicts in Africa and in the Middle East and in Asia and in South America, but most importantly, and what we I think forget to do sometimes, is connect to the United States, because we are on land. I'm currently sitting on land that was the ancestral land of the Osage, and also in a region that was the Shawnee, and there's like 574 recognized tribes in the Indian Nation, and I think I'm on the ancestral land in this region of about 8 of them. So teach your students that genocide happened in America, on this land first, and then you can take them through the Holocaust, and then it makes a lot more sense whenever you bring it back home and say, look, we have discrimination now, we have xenophobia now, we have violence now. And they won't be as surprised, because they'll say, oh, and we had it then. This isn't the first time. Because when we teach about it as an isolated incident in the 1930s and 40s, the students, I think, tend to start to live under this misconception that it was the only one. And it's a risk that that we take in introducing students to the Holocaust and no other genocides, that sometimes they think that it's an isolated incident, it's a moment in history, it'll never happen again. So I know that's a long-winded answer for basically saying we have a lot of problems with violence against a lot of different identity groups. And we need, as a people, to take the lessons of the Holocaust and apply them to helping the people who need our help now. And also, all the while, carrying on the stories of those who were killed in the Holocaust, who survived the Holocaust. We need to make sure that there's a constant effort of remembrance, but also of action. You can't do one or the other, or it just doesn't make sense to the students. The challenging thing that I'm facing is some of my students are growing up in homes that are racist and anti-Semitic and homophobic and sexist. And even worse, some of my students and some of every teacher's students are growing up in homes that are violent, and that the students have seen trauma, and students, it's a very delicate dance to take students through this content and tell them they have to take action whenever some of them might be scared to go home. So we need to do this with a trauma-informed mindset. We need to do this hand in hand with our social workers and guidance counselors. We need to make sure that all of this work is being done carefully and slowly, but also quickly. and it's hard. You kind of have to pick and choose, like which students are ready for this right now and which students are definitely not ready for this, and which students you need to be careful. That's what I guess I'm saying is light isn't for everybody. Um, Not everybody's ready for it, and there's some different metaphors that I've heard. One of my favorites is basically we're helping the students build a car, and light is the car. Not everybody's going to drive. Some of the kids are going to drive, and they're going to learn how to drive, and they're going to be able to go anywhere in the world. Some of them are just going to be along for the ride, but everybody's getting to the destination at the end. And some of the kids are going to be scared, and some of the kids, they don't know where they're going, they don't know where they're going to end up. But it's really taking everybody forward. But instead of the teacher driving the car, the students, that's the goal. The students are driving the car. I'm just the driving instructor, teaching them how to do it, helping them build it, and then letting them go. And hopefully I can do so as safely as possible.
You know, this really helps us seamlessly move into our next topic, which is challenges. So I'm curious to know about some challenges you have faced in teaching the Holocaust, and you know, what would you tell, I know we've sort of touched on this a little bit, but what advice would you give to an educator who's going to be teaching the Holocaust for the first time, given what you know of the challenges?
Yeah.
Let's go into more detail about be careful.
Yeah. I'll give you some. Um, I've done some teacher trainings before where, people ask questions. They say things like, well, I don't, full disclosure here, I have a Holocaust elective, right? I have 90 days to do this. I'm spoiled rotten. And I didn't even create it. It was Mindy Thiel, our Shaler area activities director, who created it out of her AP European history class. So she laid the groundwork with the Holocaust Center, and credit where credit is due. I didn't make my Holocaust class at Shaler. I inherited something that was good, and I just tried to make it better. So, talking about like being careful in these lessons, some people sometimes say to me, well, you have 90 days. I only have 3 days to teach the Holocaust. Well, okay, that's fine. Is if you go back to the USHMM guidelines and the Holocaust Center of Pittsburgh, you can do it in 1 day. And all you're doing is opening the door, because in 90 days, I'm still just opening the door and scratching the surface. That's what Jack says at the end of Jack Sitzalmer's survivor testimony he did back in the 80s. He talked for an hour and a half. And at the end, he says, thank you, but I got to let you know that if I were to tell you my whole story, we'd be here for days. And the guy who's interviewing him says, well, you're right. Nobody can tell their whole story in an hour and a half. You had 6 years of your life in an hour and a half. So in 90 days, I cannot teach the entire Holocaust, and you can't do it in 1 day either, but you can spark interest. So if you have 1 day, go to Chutzpah, do the Butterfly Project, do the Daffodil Campaign, do the Waldman Competition. They're local, they're established. The work has already been done for you. You don't have to make resources. They're better than anything you're going to make. And it's turnkey. It's ready to go. You can do it. Or you can go to togetherweremember.org and you can do a remembrance activity in 5 minutes. And the only required resource for a Together We Remember remembrance activity is a piece of paper that's blank. I mean, so that's thing number one. Thing number two is that I want to mention is I was in a room full of teachers once, and somebody said, well, aren't you worried about all those students who have racist family members or are racist themselves? Aren't you worried about offending them? And I said, I'm sorry, but you don't have to be polite to somebody who's racist. It's inherently impolite for them to be racist. So I'm not going to, what I mean to say is that to cite the USHMM guidelines, we need to make sure we use precise language when we're talking about the Holocaust, and we need to use precise language when we're talking about anything. We need to strive for precision of language is their guideline. And when we strive for precision of language, we need to make sure we call out what we see. The last 4 years, we've seen a lot of propaganda. We need to talk about that because our students are talking about it. with everybody. Why are we not going to talk about it with them in a classroom where it's safe and where we can get them through the propaganda? For the last 4 years, we've had demagoguery. Demagogue used to only be a vocab word in my Holocaust class. Now we've lived through it. So what does that mean? What is a demagogue? We can't be afraid to have these conversations with our students because they're seeing it constantly. We've had in the last 4 years a lot of experience with xenophobia and even some experiences, and still are having them, with anti-Semitism in the US government. Call it what it is. Don't dance around the issues. They danced around the issues in the 1930s, and we know how it ended. I danced around the issues for a long time, and my city had the worst act of anti-Semitic violence in American history. You can't dance around it. We have to call out the issues when we see them. We have to confront racism head on with the support of many different unlikely allies, meaning you need to bring together many groups of people to do this. You need to make sure you're constantly doing your research, even as a new teacher, because your students are always going to try to, one up you in the classroom. Yeah, well, I heard this statistic. Okay. And you can pause them and say, well, I didn't hear that statistic. And then you can quote Deborah Lipstadt, Holocaust scholar, and say, I didn't hear your statistic, but I know something from Deborah Lipstadt, who combats Holocaust denial. She says, there are facts or truths, there are opinions, and there are lies. And we need to call the lies when we see them. I will gladly accept your opinions and we can debate your opinions. I will present the facts and help you find the facts. I will work you through your opinions. I will shoot down every one of your lies. And in her example, in her TED talk she gave, she said, Elvis is dead. She said, the Holocaust happened. Global warming is a thing. And I would add, there was a violent, white supremacist, anti-Semitic motivated political insurrection supported by, and you can go on and on and on, however far you want to go. But we need to talk about this with our students. There were violent white supremacists in our country that a few weeks ago, or maybe at this point months ago, or maybe years ago, as people were watching this, that tried to do harm to our democracy. And we saw that in the 1920s and 30s in Germany, and we saw how it played out. So let's use these lessons and learn from them. Or in more eloquent words of Maya Angelou, history, despite its wrenching pain, cannot be unlived, but if faced with courage, need not be lived again. And how do I remember all these quotes? The best lesson for new teachers is you print them on vinyl decals with your students and you have them put them on the walls of your classroom so you look at them every day. And more importantly, so the students look at them every day.
I like that. I like that tip right there. The Holocaust Center has actually taken that tip, and we've added some quotes to our library from Toni Morrison, and all this is wonderful advice. And I'm curious, if teachers do, this isn't in our repertoire, but I'm just curious if you have any examples. If teachers do encounter students that have notions that they come to the classroom with that might be racist or anti-Semitic, in the spirit of keeping what my creative writer teacher used to call a safe laboratory, that safe space for learning. How do you balance, addressing, helping students together address their views, not just the students themselves addressing their views, but students addressing each other kind of compassionately, since you're all learning in this laboratory of the Light Initiative.
Yeah. Facts. Constant facts. And here's a mistake I used to make. I used to, and I kick myself for this today because the end of this story. I used to bring in Holocaust survivors. And after the Holocaust survivors would come in, there'd be a curriculum night or something, and the parents would say, oh, I really wish I could have met that survivor. My kid won't stop talking about Jack Sitzhammer. I really wish I could have seen his talk. I really wish I could have been there. And for years, they said things like this. And I said, yeah, maybe someday. Why was I not doing this after school? Why was I not making these events? Why was I not inviting parents to come in the middle of the school day? Why wasn't I filming it? What the heck was it? That's the new teacher rookie mistake, right? And this is an Obama quote. President Obama said, "Don't be upset if you're doing a lot of good things and nobody knows about it, if you're not telling them about it and not including them." He said, if you want people to know what you're doing, you have to constantly tell them what you're doing, or you can't be mad at them for not knowing what you're doing. So one thing that I do now, and I did it a couple of days ago, is I send out, a lot of us have, because of COVID, the ability to send mass emails to everybody, every contact of a student. So it's the student, it's like the brothers and the sisters, it's the guardians, it's the, there might be 7 email addresses for one student. And so we can use that distribution network. And I used it the other day to send out an article on white privilege from teachingtolerance.org, which is another fantastic resource, and a law school review article about the Thin Blue Line, history of the Thin Blue Line campaign and the Blue Lives Matter flags and campaign versus Black Lives Matter flags and campaign. Because some of my students took home out of context some misconceptions about white privilege and Blue Lives Matter. They were under the misconception that white privilege means that they should feel guilty for having a lot of money because their parents work their butts off. And I had to work through with them what white privilege actually is. And no, white privilege is more like the fact that you go and grab a skin colored Band-Aid and it's white, it's not brown, or, these other things. So I shared with them the Teaching Tolerance article on how to talk to kids about white privilege, and I shared that with all the families. So I hope that this conversation then goes into the home, and it's not just me and them in 42 minutes and then it's gone, and it's just all out of context and here and there. And in talking about Blue Lives Matter, the Blue Lives Matter campaign, which was created in opposition to the Black Lives Matter campaign, I found a law school review article that has more citations than words in the paragraphs. And I showed it to the students and I said, let's work through this. Let's go over the history of the Thin Blue Line campaign, the history of the police force. And then let's talk about how the Black Lives Matter campaign came about of course, it's Black History Month. Why wouldn't we talk about that? And how does Blue Lives Matter work against Black Lives Matter? And does it mean that you're against the police? Does it mean that you're against the police if you don't support Blue Lives Matter? And these are some difficult conversations. They can't be had in 42 minutes. And so I introduced my students and their families to these articles that get into the real problems with policing in the United States that go back decades, if not centuries, in the history of the police force. And then we go into the last, 6 years of the Blue Lives Matter campaign going up against the Black Lives Matter campaign. And it's delicate, right? You can't just throw people into this and say, if you have a Blue Lives Matter flag, you hate Black people, because that's what my students say. And if you have a Black Lives Matter flag, that means you hate police officers. That's what some teenagers say. They want to narrow it down to this bucket or this bucket, this column or this column. And it's never that simple. And so what we need to do as teachers is help them sort through the many shades of gray, but also make sure we don't let them spout lies as opinions, because we have a real problem with systematic racism. We have a real problem with police violence in this country. We have a real problems in this country that need to be addressed, and not talking about them is not the answer. So facts, share the facts with your students, share the facts with their families, share the facts always, because if you don't, they're going to see your facts as opinions, and in some households as lies.
And this is what it all comes down to. The Holocaust Educator of the Year is about inspiring critical thought. Um, inspiring it, and then also teaching students how to think for themselves, how to look at the facts. And you're doing such an amazing job out in Shaler, and that has light has had this ripple effect. And it's something to be quite proud of, and I look forward to seeing what more light has in the future and what you have in the future. I've attended one of your community events, and it was so powerful. So the whole community was there. I can't really describe how awesome that was, that this was not just students learning, but it was your entire community learning about the Holocaust, and not only the Holocaust, but learning about Jewish culture, learning about other genocides and human rights violations, learning about, I believe you had a Croatian student speak. That was incredible to hear from both, a former student and Shaler family, just sort of bringing this history to home. And that's sort of what the Holocaust Center also is trying to show, is that the Holocaust isn't something that happened over there. That's something, it's human history. It's not just a Jewish story. And you can apply that to so many other histories and what's happening now. And I'm so grateful for this interview, Nick. This has been amazing, learning from you and introducing you to our community again. And I want to give you an opportunity to, I know that there's some things coming up for Light. The Holocaust Center also has some things coming up in April, because April is Genocide Awareness Month, and I want to give you the opportunity to tell us a little bit about what teachers and students might want to become involved in.
Yeah, there's a lot in a nutshell, and just to wrap everything up. Number one, whenever I talk about the community, I'm always thinking about like representatives of the community. So while I can't always get everybody to events, and I've never gotten everybody to events, right? I've always managed to, and I seek to get, Republicans and Democrats and librarians and grandparents and little kids and representatives from all different ethnicities and races, and you try to get a diverse in generations and diversity in other ways too, so that they can spread that message, just spark some interest, open some doors, inspire some people. And that's what we're going to do all April. Light is now a network of about 15 schools, and it's going to continue to grow and expand. And all those 15 schools, Light has funding for 15 schools, I should say, right now. And so it's going to expand. We can't give money to every school in the country, but hopefully we can create a pathway for schools to have incentives to take part in Light all across the country. And Light in April will be partnering, of course, with the Holocaust Center of Pittsburgh and all of their programming, and introducing a lot of student-created Genocide Awareness Month programming surrounding Holocaust remembrance and also other victims of identity-based violence and discrimination, and plugging into the togetherweremember.org network, which is part of a global network. So there's, in April, through Light and the Holocaust Center, we're going to have programs through Rwanda and Cambodia and Bosnia and South Africa and all across the United States and throughout Asia, and really connecting the past to the present in a way that we've never seen before, with the Holocaust as the foundation of all of it, but keeping in mind that we really have the opportunity and the potential right now to transform Holocaust remembrance into something great, into something truly inspiring and empowering. And I think it all starts with our students. And so this April, lots of student opportunities that are going to trickle up to the rest of the community at large.
Yeah, that's amazing. I really look forward to meeting with your students and seeing them actually, when the beginning of the pandemic occurred and we did genocide awareness activities online. It was so refreshing to see your students being so invested. And I look forward to that again this year. And we hope that your students and everyone's students will be able to join the Holocaust Center of Pittsburgh's events coming up. We have a number of online events that you can see at our webpage at hcofpgh.org. /events. The primary event in April is our Yom HaShoah Memorial. Yom HaShoah is Holocaust Remembrance Day. And every year we commemorate the lives of the 6 million Jews who perished in the Holocaust, as well as other victim groups. And this year you can expect our ceremony to occur at 11 a.m. on April 8th. So be sure to look out for those invitations and all the resources that can be used leading up to that event, both from the Holocaust Center of Pittsburgh, from the lightinitiative.org. Together We Remember. We're going to be listing all of these resources underneath Nick's incredible interview. And Nick, I hope that you'll give me some recommendations. I'll have a little list of Nick's recommendations under the video to help our novice teachers and seasoned teachers to keep up with this very meaningful but difficult work. So thank you again, Nick. This was amazing. And I look forward to seeing you again soon, hopefully in person.
Yes, someday soon. And let me end with these words. I think it's important to note that I'm definitely not smarter than a lot of other teachers I know, but I think that what I have really succeeded with, and my secret to success, is just looking to organizations and institutions and individuals who just do this really well and connect students to them. And that's a lifelong learning. Then beyond my class, they can continue to have these relationships with the Holocaust Center and the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum, Together We Remember, whoever else. And that's when we really take Holocaust education outside of the classroom, is whenever we show them a path to lifelong learning. And that's what I think we should all strive to do, of course.
Indeed, we should. Thank you again, Nick. And everyone stay tuned for more conversations soon.